What attracts people at this energetic level is passion.
When I became vulnerable, Joe, my career went up. Successful people ask for help. Like the most successful people ask for help all the time.
It's a lot easier to get known in the world if I'm really narrow in my niche.
The Earley Show will begin after a brief word from today's sponsor, Answering Legal. Visit answeringlegal.com to learn more about our 24/7 virtual receptionist team.
Answering Legal helps my practice by allowing me to never miss a call, and all of my clients and potential clients, when they call, they always reach a live person. The office doesn't miss any calls anymore. We get text messages. Somebody is available 24/7. Clients can call and reach a live person at any time. I absolutely would recommend Answering Legal to other attorneys in our area. It allows attorneys to have a little more freedom. Answering Legal allows me to get more work done.
Welcome back to the Earley Show. Today we'll be sharing part 2 of my interview with Joe Freed. I truly appreciate how you've established your reputation, how you've niched, almost everyone on this call, knows your truck accident, lawyer, that's your niche, but you had to start somewhere. You didn't start that way with, handling big cases across the country, right? And so you hustled and you worked and you got punched in the face and you got up and you kept going. What was your mind? So I believe you really focus on attorneys. You do a lot of speaking, I believe, right? You go to I've seen your conferences. And so it's smart. That's my approach too. I like to get in front of attorneys, right? Because attorneys get phone calls, they get cases. When did you really lean into, I know at first you started car fire cases, right? And then you graduated.
I did, yeah.
Could you speak to that? And I think you were laughed at, I heard you remark at a group setting once, you said, I'm a truck accident lawyer. I think they were laughed you out of the room or something.
Yeah, they did. I laughed at a lot when I first started that because back then, nobody knew what a truck crash lawyer was. I should have gone in the billboard business back then. I'd be very wealthy and I wouldn't have to work anymore and, all those kind of things. But so my quick story is I started out as a med mal lawyer.
Okay.
And I did that for several years, and then I happened into a case. When I was a med mal, I did mostly birth trauma cases.
Okay.
Then I happened into a case where a woman was burned alive in a Ford Mustang that was hit from behind, almost like the Pinto case. It was a wreck that should not have caused the thing to catch fire. It did, and she was not able to get out of the vehicle. And she burned. She died 42 days later. That took me onto an 8-year journey where I did nothing but cases involving post-rear collision fires against Ford.
Okay.
And what interestingly happened, and I think it's important because it kind of starts to get to your question of marketing, is by niching down. I literally handled I would tell, what do you do for a living? Well, I handle cases where cars get hit from the rear and they catch fire. What?
Yeah.
So if it's like from the corner to the corner, I'm your guy. But if you get around the side of the car, I'm the wrong guy for you. And they go, whoa, that is so specialized. How many cases like that are there? Unfortunately, too many. And I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I'd like for that never to happen again. Right. And so what happened is then that became something, that's a story that people remember. I get calls. I just got a call last week. I haven't done a post-collision fire case for almost 20 years. And I got a phone call last week from someone saying, hey, man, once upon a time, you were the fire guy. I'm like, I was the fire guy. And crazily enough, I remembered a lot of the stuff. And he was asking me about crash tests and, the like. But so here's the whole thing for the listeners and how the niche down thing worked for me. And this goes to a lot of things we were already talking about. As a young lawyer, I remember very distinctly being in a room full of lawyers. And I'm looking out over this sea of lawyers. And I remember suddenly feeling literally this big, tiny. And I remember looking around and suddenly getting this kind of cold chill saying, how am I going to ever be anybody? How can I ever compete? I mean, look at these people. That guy's like the governor's grandson. I mean, that guy has a $1 billion verdict. Billion. That guy over there is a former judge. That guy over there is a fourth generation lawyer. That guy has buildings named after him. That guy has a park named after him. And I'm sitting there going, who the hell am I? Why should anybody hire me? I wouldn't hire me. I'm hiring that guy, you know? And about the same time, somebody asked me, what does it take to be an expert in something? And I said, a PhD and 20 years of experience. And they said, well, that's one way. Another way is if you write something authoritative and your peer group asks you to present to them on that topic, then you're an expert. They're looking at you as an expert. I was like, that's interesting. And within days, my young lawyer self took my rest of my body down to, at the time, the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association headquarters. And I asked them, I said, who runs the CLEs? And they told me, and I called him up and I went, I saw him and I said, you run the CLE committee, which means you're the guy who does all the work and all these other people don't do anything. I said, why don't you put me on your committee and I'll actually be a worker bee for you and do some stuff, because I'm interested in how this CLE business works. And so he put me on there. And of course, I was the only worker bee. In fact, I learned as soon as I got on there, he didn't do anything. I just did it all. So much so that the next year they asked me to run the CLE programs. And then I learned that there's actually power in that. If I call Chris Earley, or if Chris Earley calls me and says, hey, you want to be on my show? I go, damn, I feel good. You made me feel good, Chris. You're feeding my ego. I want to be on your show. And I like you for having brought me onto your show. Well, the same is true if you're running a program. If I get to call you up and Chris, first of all, you're going to take my call. Because I say, I'm calling you to see if you want to speak at a CLE program, you take my call, right? Otherwise, you don't have the time of day for me, right? So I learned that. And then I also learned, because I sat through a lot of these programs and I saw those are good speakers, those are not so good speakers. And it's true, whoever gets put up on the stage really is the expert on things.
Right. They're elevated, literally, right? They're
elevated. And so I started to say, and somebody on a program, somebody finally said, why don't you present? And so then you're crossing over and saying, am I going to be good at this or not? Am I going to be good at this presenting thing, or am I, because, there's the fear of public speaking, and now you're in front of not only a jury, but a jury of your peers. I mean, for real, like you feel really judged. And turned out I was okay at this, right? And so that was the beginning. And so all of that, what marketing became to me was I am purely a B2B marketer as opposed to like business to business, not B2C. I'm not on billboards.
From the start.
Always. From the start. Never been on buses, billboards, TV, radio, nothing like that. I've always, and starting as a med-mal lawyer, you can appreciate that as a med-mal lawyer, people were happy to send me business. They don't want the damn med-mal case. So it's not that hard to be a good marketing person as a med-mal lawyer. Right. But with trucking, what I had to do when it came to trucking is I had to convince the world that trucking cases were not the same as car crash cases. Because at the time, back 20 years ago, that's how the cases were universally handled. Nobody really even understood that there was this whole different legal system, whole standards that were different than the way we drive our cars. That the training was different than the way we drive our cars. That the dynamics of what happened in crashes are different, that the way these companies are supposed to manage their fleets are different than what people would normally expect, that there's a regulatory schema around this. Nobody even understood that. And when I looked at that, I came out of doing the auto product stuff. I knew I needed to niche back down into something,
right?
Because I was successful in helping Ford make a decision to change the design of the Mustang. They changed to a different rear suspension, which allowed them to move the fuel tank, which is what I was after them to do. And they did that. They called me up and they said, hey, we're doing it. I said, great. They came and settled all my cases with me, and I haven't sued them since. But then I floundered around for about a year trying to figure out what I would niche down into next. Because for me, I knew that I'm not saying this is true for everybody, but for me, it's a lot easier to get known in the world if I'm really narrow in my niche.
100%.
The more broad I am, it's counterintuitive because you think the more things I do, the more phone calls I'll get. Sorry, the more things you do, the harder it is for people to think of you
right
as the person. Because think about it, in whatever community you're watching this from, who are the best PI lawyers in your community? You'll think of lots of them. But if I say things like, for MedMal, who are you calling? You just zero down to 2 or 3 people in your community. If it's a TBI case, who are you calling? You just narrow down into a couple of people.
Right.
But if I say PI, there's a ton of really good ones, right? There's a lot, and the truth is there are a lot of good people.
Right.
And so what I would tell your people, if they're interested in this concept, is that the narrowing down, actually, it's counterintuitive, but the more narrow you draw your lines, the easier it is to become known. You just have to allow your geography to grow, right? Because for me, in car fire cases, for instance, there may not be enough in Boston to do only car fire cases, right? Although, frankly, you don't need very many. I'll be honest with you. If you have 3 or 4 car fire cases, you and your family are going to do just fine.
Right.
In fact, you don't want to have 25. You want to have 4 or 5. Same with MedMal. So, the right cases, you don't need that many. But the idea is, by niching down, it's easier to tell a story that people remember. An elevator pitch, so to speak. This is what I do. Oh, you're the guy who does blah, blah, blah. So I would ask each of your listeners, if someone were going to say that about you, what would they say? Chris, you're the guy who does blah, blah, blah. What is it that you want that to be? You choose it, just like your mindset. You choose what you want that brand to be. And then you need to, a couple things, and these are things you've already mentioned in other contexts on this show. Energy, right? What attracts people at this energetic level is passion. So
100%.
Pick something that you're passionate about, and the world will open up to you.
Yes.
Because they won't be able, and even lawyers who have much bigger numbers and much bigger results than you will not be able to compete with you because your passion will beat them. There are many better lawyers than me when it comes to numbers, but there are very few who people think of more than me for trucking, partially because this isn't a fake thing for me. I really do have passion around this area. I do want the world to be safer. I have spent ridiculous amounts of time on things that I'm not going to ever get compensated for, except the knowledge that I made a difference. That's more than enough compensation for me. If I know that I made a difference in something, that feels good, right? So the idea is niche down to something that you care about, that you have passion about, and then write about it and get yourself on the speaking tour in front of other people. And look, there's a reason at this point, because I don't need anything anymore, Chris, to use your phraseology. I've got enough. When I go and speak and do things now, I don't need to do it to get another case, but I do. It still is the way I get my business. But I do, last year I did 102 or 103 talks around the country on top of running a national law firm, trying cases and doing that. But I love it. I have a huge passion for teaching. And when I'm teaching, I'm really teaching. I'm not teaching just to get a case. It gives me great pleasure if I can teach Chris Earley something that helps him go and knock it out of the frickin' park for a client, and I get an email from Chris and he says, Joe, man, what we talked about made a difference. We did this. Man, that's a payday for me. I get to see that I get to see that every week now from people.
Well, you and I maybe could be talking right now if you didn't come to Massachusetts and we shook hands and we had an exchange. I don't know if we're talking right now. So now think about the exponential impacts of you and I. We're just having a conversation one-on-one. This is going to hit a lot of people. It's going to be circulated, right? And I love that. Let me ask you this. I have a couple questions. I think I asked you this after your presentation in Massachusetts at the convention. How many cases do you typically have in your office at one time that you're involved in?
So I have to explain it this way. There's different levels of cases for my involvement.
Okay.
I'm in a little bit of a weird situation right now because, first of all, to answer the question very directly, there's usually 5 or 6 cases that I am front and center on, that I'm doing most of the work on. But then I have several other lawyers in my office that I'm signed on to their cases. If those cases try, I may very well be involved in the trial of the case or the effort to mediate the case. And I might even jump into that case to take a key deposition and things like that. And then what was weird this year, a good friend of mine relatively early in the year got kind of a rough diagnosis. So my caseload literally tripled overnight. Wow. Thankfully, he's doing great and he's getting back in the saddle. So hopefully that's fading back down. But where I'd like to be as I move forward from here is I'd like to be working on somewhere around 5 cases at a time where what I'm doing in those cases is all the strategy work. And then I'm taking the key depositions in the case, and I'm involved in efforts to mediate or settle or try the case. And then I'm helping other people both in my office and outside of my office with very specific things. I think you may know one of the things, trucking is my thing, but in most recent years, last 5 or 6 years, I've kind of become known for this speed trial, what they're calling speed trial. I didn't name it that because it's not really about speed. It's more about clarity and speed, and brevity is a welcome byproduct of really niching the case down. But I help multiple people a week who I don't have any financial interest in their case, but we literally just get on a Zoom and they'll walk me through their case, and I chop their case down into little tiny pieces. And it's fun for me. It makes me better at what I do. And they go try much quicker, more directed cases. And it seems to be working for folks around the country. So it's fun for me to see that. And then I'm still doing a lot of trucking. So the long answer to, obviously I've given you the long answer. The short answer is ideally 4 or 5 cases that I'm focused on that are really occupying my day in and day out thinking, teaching, and then helping other people with select cases. And even the cases that I'm doing the 4 or 5 on, I have help in. I've kind of become a prima donna. I mean, I've got a phenomenal staff of people. I mean, I have a full-time safety director who works for me, for trucking safety director. He touches every one of my cases. He helps me, he collaborates with me on strategy. I have an amazing lawyer named Nathan Gaffney, who I call him my lawyer. He keeps me between the legal lines, so I can focus more on the human lines.
Right.
I've got another amazing lawyer, Brian Mildenhall, who is on many of my cases, taking the stuff that I don't want to do. He does a lot of my medical stuff now, a lot of my damages stuff now. It lets me focus on liability. I've got an amazing paralegal, Brianne Kunkel, and a couple of others who just help me constantly. So I really have an amazing team, which allows me to kind of pick and choose what I want to do. And for me, this truly is my passion. So I'd rather do this than play golf most of the time. Yeah, I'd rather do this.
Do you take time off, or are you always working? You always hustling, always grinding.
I'm not great at that taking time off thing. Okay. I mean, I'm not good at balance. I'm trying to be better at that, but that's part of my work in progress. And my reality is that I kind of used to beat myself up over that. And then I realized that, this is not just workaholicism at this point. I mean, I have gone through an amazing process of narrowing down what I do, right? So the things that I do in the cases that I do are things I love doing. And I have largely been able to give up the things that don't energize me. So, a couple of years ago, I figured out that, even though I'm really good at taking doctor depositions and all that, I mean, hell, I was a med mal lawyer. I'm pretty good at that. I just don't like it anymore. Yeah, it's just so many times it's so, I mean, it's like that world is so, it's so false. Like each side is hiring a lawyer, a doctor to say some BS about a case. And I mean, the truth is somewhere in the middle of it or whatever. I mean, I just don't, I don't, and everybody's a prima donna. I mean, you can't hardly get to a treating doctor anymore and sit down and have a conversation with them. Yeah. About the case. It used to be when I started, you'd sit down, you make an appointment, you pay the person, you do it. Now it's like an ordeal. You got to go through your legal counsel and, blah, blah, blah. So it's just, and in some parts of the country, it's impossible. You just can't. So that I realized I don't really like it anymore. There are select people that I want to go and depose. They're taking a position. I want to be the person to attack the position or whatever. But so I just don't do it anymore. I mean, I have other people who are great at doing it, who love doing it, and they do a great job at it. So I don't have to.
You've earned the right to be a prima donna.
Well, I don't know if I've earned it or not. I am one, though. In fact, somebody the other day, one of my paralegals said, it takes a lot of people to run Joe Freed's life. And I'm like, have I become that guy for real? That's me. And they go, yeah, you are. That's you. And I'm like,
a lot of energy going on here. Let me ask you, so you casually dropped that you did 100 presentations. I got a couple of questions. Did you have to seek those out, or they came to you for the most part? Just
at this point, I say no to more than I say yes to. And no, I don't really seek them out. There are some times when I'll hear about somebody putting something together. I'll hear about it in advance, and I if I think that I say sometimes, I'm thinking of one situation recently where somebody was putting something together, and I found out about it, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, man, I'd like to be involved in this piece if you have room for me." Because one of the things I'm spending a lot of time on, you brought up the energy thing. That's become my whole life now. Is this mindset and energy, and the idea that like when you think about it, if you're taking a deposition, you've spent a lot of time thinking about the words and the sequence, and because you're a wordsmith and you're a strategist, and so you've spent this time doing all this stuff. But very, very few lawyers think about, what state do I want the witness to be in when I get to these questions? And how can I influence that state? What state do I need to show up in order for the energy to be a certain way? Or let's go into a deposition. Let's go into a jury selection. I know you guys don't get as much of that in Boston area, although technically you're supposed to now, but it's slow in coming. But I mean, so forget that. Even when you get up to open your case, how different is it if you if you really understand the energy, then that. So I'm struggling over my words because there's so much I want to say in a short period of time. But think of this. Everything you've ever learned about rapport, the things how you build rapport, there's science behind it, right? It's the sales world has studied it more than anybody else, but there's science behind why is it that how do you build rapport? And there's all about mirror neurons, and why does pacing somebody work, or mirroring somebody build rapport, or using the same language as somebody build rapport. There's a science behind it. If we had more time, we could get into. But what's happening is at this energy level, you are starting to trust me or not trust me because of things that are happening at an energy level because of how I am. And I can either take control of that or I cannot take control of that. And it happens on a one-on-one basis, but what I've been working on is how can we make that apply in a group dynamic, with a jury? So how can we build group rapport using the same concepts? And it's been pretty fascinating because this isn't a place that I've found that anybody has written on. So it's kind of me flailing around in this and doing my own focus groups, and so my life has kind of become about this little experimentation world that I'm living in, where I'm trying to go into a jury selection or go into a conference. Sometimes I go into a conference. Sometimes my goal of going into a deposition is to see if I can just change the energy in the room, right? And certainly in a conference. And of course, the answer is you can. Mm-hmm. So now the question is, can you do it repeatedly repeatedly and convincingly, and so can you do it at will? Can this become a new instrument that we play, just like our voice is an instrument, just like our eyes might be an instrument? So can this become something that can be? I don't know. I'm not articulating it very well, but can this is it's almost like it's the answer to the reason why some of the things we do work and why some of the things we do don't work.
Right.
I mean, taken apart at this energy level. I know you're in tune with this because you've mentioned it several times, and it makes me know that you spend time thinking about it.
I'm with you on that. Let me ask you this related question that I have to talk about is vulnerability. So when I became vulnerable, Joe, my career went up, right? Because I was never sharing my story. Now, literally, I talk about my memoir. I get into everything, Joe. I talk about some dark stuff. I talk about my stories relates to other people. I'm being very vulnerable. When I'm vulnerable, I get speaking opportunities. I get cases, and it's not because I'm being vulnerable strategically. It's that it's vulnerability. And I've heard you talk about vulnerability to deposition at a trial setting. How have you, been vulnerable as you've gotten older, right? Are you just, does that resonate with you as it, just being authentic, right? Walking in with that energy? Because we keep energy.
Absolutely.
I mean, just being vulnerable. Like I just shared my story with you about trauma. If we talked 10 years ago, I wouldn't be talking about this. You wouldn't know anything about me. Just I'm a lawyer.
No, you'd hide it.
100%. But now it's like we're finding common ground. It's a real conversation, authenticity, vulnerability. I really encourage everyone on the call, be vulnerable, right? So, being vulnerable with your clients, with the judge, there's no separation here. I feel like you get vulnerable in your practice, and I think it's underutilized, and I think it's essential. Could you just talk about that, what it means to you, not as an attorney, but, as a vulnerable man who's been through a lot, practicing law? How does that play out?
So like you, it started out being the opposite.
Yeah.
Like, and I was taught, I think the people who taught me don't be vulnerable, hide your, don't, practice taking a gut punch without anybody knowing that you just took a gut punch. You hear those kind of stories and you go, yeah, that I didn't make this shit up. I mean, somebody taught me this, right? I mean, don't let them see you sweating, don't pretend like that didn't hurt. Like what? Now I think about that and go, God, that's such the wrong answer.
Yeah.
But what happened probably in the same way that it happened for you. For me, it was part of that journey that came through psychodrama. Because what happened is with psychodrama, you end up exposing the most personal things ever, maybe the first time ever,
right?
Maybe the very first time ever in public. And what you find is that instead of people rejecting you, because you think that if I expose this about myself, people are going to think poorly of me. They're going to shun me. They're going to push me away. They're going to push me out of the club. I don't even feel like I'm part of the club. They're going to even push me even further outside the club. They're going to think I'm a weirdo. They're not going to want to be around me. They're not going to date me. They're not going to love me. They're not going to whenever it is. They're not going to hire me as their lawyer. They're not going to hire me to try their case. All those kind of things. So it's the fear of rejection, right?
Yep.
And what happens is when you, whether intentionally or by life circumstance, you are vulnerable at one point and you see that people don't reject you. In fact, they accept you in a way that you've never even felt accepted this way before. It's eye-opening. Heart-opening.
Yeah. Different energy, for sure. Definitely.
It's totally different. And you go, I didn't get rejected. I actually got accepted, and people actually like me and drawn to me.
Arms open here. Right.
And the other thing that happens is they come up and they say, hey, thank you for having the courage to say that. That's part of my life too. And I've never, ever had the courage to say it out loud. Wow, I feel courageous, even though I didn't feel courageous at the time. So then you start to realize that courage isn't the absence of fear; it's acting in the face of fear.
Yes.
Right? And suddenly you start to create. Wait, the more vulnerable I am, the more I'm accepted, not the more I'm rejected. So it and what I would add to what you said earlier is, it's in life, not just in practice of law. That you have to start. So every place you practice being vulnerable. So every place is about, because what you do in your regular world is what you're going to do under the pressure of a trial or a deposition or a confrontation. So you talked about being vulnerable with judge. I'm very vulnerable with judges. You know, and sometimes, and part of that is that awareness piece. Vulnerability first requires an awareness, right?
Absolutely.
So like a judge is getting onto you for something, and the tendency, because ego is going to make you want to fight back, and but wisdom says, hold on, ego, hold on a minute. She's right. I am disrespecting her right now. I am doing that. I am being a bully.
Yeah.
Right now, I am trying to manipulate in an unfair way. And then what happens if you say, hold on, judge, I owe you a huge apology. It must feel to you like I'm really trying to manipulate you, and I think I am.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And I'd like to apologize, and I'd like it to stop right now.
Wow.
What do you think's going to happen? The fear is that the judge is going to get mad at you, but that's not what happens. That's not what happens.
Not
What
gonna
happens
happen.
is you are
Never gonna
immediately forgiven, and the judge now respects you in a way that's so different. So now later, when you have whatever other issue, the judge goes, look, this is the same person who, when they were screwing with me before, they owned it. And they might say, hey, are you trying to manipulate me again like you did that one? And
Right.
Actually, I'm not. That, you know, I did that time, and I told you. And but first, you have to be willing to check in. Part of vulnerability is honesty. It's not just vulnerability. I'm going to throw some bad shit out there.
Oh, it's raw.
So vulnerability means I'm going to share something that is real, but it's not. It doesn't feel like it's favorable to me, right? So you first have to wait, and you have to check yourself. Like in that moment when the judge is yelling at you, saying, I can't believe you're doing it. You just sit there. First, you have to say, wait, the part of me that wants to immediately become defensive, hold on a minute. Let me check in. Is there a part of what she's saying that's right? Oh, shit, there is. I am doing that. And now do you have the courage? Now do you have the courage? I mean, imagine this with your spouse.
Right.
Or with your kid.
Everything.
Right? I mean, with anybody, your law partner, your associate. Think of people not hierarchically above you, but hierarchically below you.
Right.
Your employee, your whatever. You got to be vulnerable with them too. You can't just play to the people who can help you, because then you're not a credible person. So I always ask myself the question, you know, when someone says, well, what do you do in this situation? My instinct is always to say, what would the most credible person in the room do? That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. So if you just said something that's not 100% gospel truth in a case, and you're kind of being called out on it, or even before you get called out on it, and you say, I just realized, I just stepped in it. What would the most credible person in the room do right then? I think most of the time they go, oh, wait a minute. You don't try to spin it. You just say, I just have to own something. I just let my zealous advocate just jumped out from behind the bush and acted before I could stop him, and I screwed up, right? I want to take that back, and I want to fix that.
I love it.
And you get a lot of credit for doing that. But look, I know we've gone way over here, but
no, that's just a couple more, quick questions.
Yeah, sure.
I encourage everyone listening, be vulnerable, ask lawyers for help. All of us are stuck, at our desk, freaked out. I don't know what the answer to this. Ask for help, right? Simon Sinek, I listened to him recently. He's talking about really successful people ask for help. Like the most successful people ask for help all the time. I encourage everyone to do it.
You know what's so important? What's so important about what you just said there is what you're challenging there is people's belief before they hear you say that.
Right.
That asking for help is weak. Asking for help makes me look bad. Asking for help, ... Whatever your messaging is that you've lived your life up until today believing, please let go of it. That's what Chris is asking you to do.
Yeah,
let go of it and just try to live life with a little bit of a change in that. Start to tell yourself asking for help is human. Asking for help is smart, because asking for help is not a bad thing. And why the hell do you think you're supposed to know everything anyway?
Right.
Right. And your credibility goes up from asking, not down from asking.
But lawyers don't do that, Joe. I wish more.
But you got to, the point is, you got to change that internal belief that asking for help is a negative, and then you'll start to give yourself permission to actually ask for the help. So go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think
no, you're good. No, you're good. So a couple of just last ones. What motivates you at this stage? High degree of success and stature. What motivates you?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that motivates me now is I finally feel like I'm pretty good at this. And I feel a compulsion to share what I've learned with people. In the same way that I think is motivating you to do this show. I think that what motivates you is you want to share. I can tell.
Yeah,
and it's not just,
I love it, Joe.
It's not just to share. It's not just to share to get a case, right? I mean, you never get a case. It's about, so there's something, it makes me feel good. I feel like I finally have some street cred. The other thing that motivates me a lot is I've got a daughter who's a third-year law student.
Wonderful.
I'd like to leave this place a little better than I found it. I'd like to leave. So the things that I think about now are legacy things. Can little old Joe Freed, who stood there in that sea of lawyers and wondered if he could ever be anything, can he actually have, I'm getting emotional saying it this way, but can he leave some kind of a mark that leaves this thing that we do, that we love doing a little bit better, just a little bit better.
You've done very good, Joe. You've done very good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Chris, especially coming from you. Yeah.
No, I appreciate your candid vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate that very much, and being an open book and being strong enough to be an open book, right? There's no airs about you. There's no BS. I appreciate that. Finally, I want to ask you this: what book have you read that's had the biggest impact on your life or business? Just what has hit you right in the face with the most impact in terms of what book?
Wow, I read so many things. I don't know that I could pick one that would change things. I don't know what's coming to mind right now as one of the things that really helped me a lot was I read Don Miguel Ruiz's books, like for instance, The Four Agreements.
I just started that. I'm a quarter of the way into it.
Yeah, and there's another one called The Mastery of Love, and they're short books. They're Toltec wisdom kind of books, and the reason they spoke so much to me is there's a lot to them behind, like that really kind of explain human conduct, and so I love reading anything that Brene Brown writes about vulnerability, and I like anything Ryan Holiday writes, anything about stoicism in its original form. It's kind of getting a little bit watered down in a lot of circles right now. But what I encourage people to do is to be on the same journey that you're talking about and that I'm talking about. I mean the idea that I want to learn as much as I can about the human animal, and I'm one of them, right? Yeah. And so to truly, like the coaching I did last year was amazing because it was really challenging so many things, beliefs, and that I had formed in my early childhood and that were still controlling my life. Psychodrama helps with that a lot. So the books are one thing, and for people who aren't book people, there's great podcasts and things to listen to about these same topics. Mm-hmm. But then also I really encourage people to go and try things like psychodrama because it's an experiential thing. They create a very safe place to do work. And you get to experience for the first time this thing that you and I have talked about here, but it's hard to talk about. And that's what it feels like to put yourself out there and to not get the reaction that you thought you were going to get, which was going to be pushed away, but instead to be embraced and to be encouraged and for people to say, what you just said made a difference in my life. You normalized the experience that I went through. I thought I was the only one. Those are powerful, powerful lessons. And the more people do that, the better our world's going to be.
Absolutely. And if you don't chase, all the material stuff, it's going to come to you as a byproduct, right? You don't have to chase that. It's all
so true.
All good things will come your way. One thing I'm taking away from this conversation is how you do something is how you do everything. You can't put a different hat on in the courtroom. I don't think. I think you kind of have to be true, a true Joe, a true Chris. Obviously, you kind of adjust the hat a little bit in court, right? But you kind of have to be a little bit consistent here, right? I think that's
as little as possible. It's a work in progress to be the same person in all circumstances.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but we're trying.
It's part of my coaching is whenever I hear somebody say it's hard, which is I'd say that to myself. His comment to me was always, "It is if you tell yourself it is."
Oh yeah,
and I was like, "Damn it!"
That's self-talk.
Right. It's that self-talk is so important because we're talking to our subconscious all the time. It's always listening. So it is.
I love it.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Joe.
I feel like I knew we would be friends, but I feel like I've made a new friend on this.
Likewise, 100%.
And if I can ever be of any help to you or anybody who's listening to this, I'm just a phone call away.
I appreciate Joe. How can people reach out to you?
Honestly, the best way to get me, people think I'm crazy, but here's my cell phone number. My best way to get me is area code 404-429-6677, or send me an email. The easiest email to remember is mylawyerjoe@gmail.com. That's not my official email. My official email is joe@freedgoldberg.com. But either one of them will get through to me, and I'd be happy to hear from folks. So I appreciate you having me.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. It's a very deep conversation. I look forward to seeing you at the next conference. Thank you so much. Keep doing your thing. I love what you're doing. I know this episode's going to hit someone.
Stay on the journey.
Always.
I'll see you along the way on the journey.
I'm looking forward. All right, that's it for this episode of The Earley Show. Be sure to check out more episodes of our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the Answering Legal YouTube channel.